For years, Tensura fans have come to the same conclusion. Nobody can defeat Rimuru. And looking at everything he has accomplished, that idea seems completely reasonable. He defeated impossible enemies, became a true demon lord, obtained abilities capable of altering the very laws of reality, and reached a level of power that few characters can even comprehend. But there's a problem. The light novels reveal something that many fans overlook. Rimuru may be unbelievably powerful, but there is still one reason why he cannot truly be considered invincible. And the most interesting part, this detail appears over and over throughout the story. The question is, what is the one factor that can still threaten Rimuru? And is there anyone capable of exploiting it? When fans talk about Rimuru, they usually focus on raw power. But the story itself shows that raw power was never his greatest advantage. What truly made Rimuru so dangerous was his ability to adapt. Every time he encountered an obstacle, he evolved. Every time he faced a greater threat, he found a solution. And that created a dangerous impression. The impression that Rimuru will always have an answer for everything. But there's one important detail. That ability only works when Rimuru has enough time to understand the problem. And that's where the first question appears. What would happen if he faced something he couldn't analyze in time? Melim is a perfect example. Many fans constantly debate who would win in a fight between the two. But perhaps that's the wrong question. The real point is something else. Melim represents something that rarely appears in the story. Overwhelming power without preparation. She doesn't need elaborate strategies. She doesn't need to accumulate abilities. She doesn't need to study her opponent. She simply possesses enough power to completely change the course of a battle. Why does that matter? Because she represents a type of threat that Rimuru doesn't normally face. Yet, even here there's a problem. As the story progresses, that gap seems to become smaller and smaller. And that leads us to something even more concerning. When Guy Crimson enters the discussion, most people immediately think about power scaling. But Guy is dangerous for a different reason. Experience. While Rimuru evolved over the course of a few years, Guy spent thousands of years accumulating knowledge, witnessing wars, manipulating conflicts, understanding how the world works. And that creates a fascinating situation. For the first time, the advantage isn't necessarily power. It's the ability to predict movements, anticipate decisions, exploit mistakes. As a result, the discussion stops being about who is stronger, and becomes about who can control the situation more effectively. But even that isn't the greatest threat. For much of the series, the conflicts revolve around kingdoms, armies, demon lords, dragons. But as the story progresses, entirely different entities begin to appear. Beings that don't merely threaten individuals. They threaten the world itself. And among them, one name stands out. Feldway. Why? Because he attacks the most dangerous weakness Rimuru still has. The need to react to unpredictable situations. Feldway doesn't rely solely on power. He relies on planning, manipulation, strategy. And that changes everything. Because for the first time, the battle doesn't begin on the battlefield. It begins long before the fight ever starts. But there's something even worse. Ivarage. A name surrounded by mystery. An existence so abnormal that even incredibly powerful characters approach it with caution. And that immediately attracts attention. Because Tensura rarely introduces threats capable of worrying the strongest monsters in the series. The problem is that nobody truly knows where Ivarage's limits are. Nobody knows its full potential. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. For the first time, we encounter a threat that even readers cannot fully measure. But there's an irony here. The greater the threat becomes, the more Rimuru tends to evolve. And that brings us to the final answer. Is Rimuru invincible? No. At least not in the way many fans imagine. The light novels clearly show that there are still beings capable of threatening him. There are opponents capable of pushing him to his limits. There are situations that can place him at a disadvantage. But there's a reason defeating Rimuru becomes harder and harder with every arc. Rimuru doesn't rely solely on strength. He relies on evolution, adaptation, learning. And the further the story progresses, the more dangerous that combination becomes. Which is why the real question may never have been, who can defeat Rimuru? The real question is, who can defeat him before he finds a way to overcome the problem? Because up until now, that has always been his most terrifying ability. Melim, Guy Crimson, Feldway, Ivarage. All of them represent genuine threats. But none of them have a guaranteed victory. Because fighting Rimuru means fighting a character who constantly breaks through his own limits. And maybe that's exactly what makes this debate so interesting. In your opinion, which of these characters actually has the best chance of defeating Rimuru? Or do you think he has already become practically unstoppable?